I had my children on the floor. I was on my favourite blanket that my grandmother gave me on the floor like a cat.
And I realised in that moment the potential of what our bodies can really do as women. Like I could feel his head, I could do my own internal, like, yeah, his head, I could feel it.
I was in tears, I was just in tears and overwhelmed with gratitude.
Hi, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast, the podcast that is bringing embodied birth wisdom from women from all over the world, sharing their natural birth stories. Don't forget to subscribe and download so that you can always have access to these empowering and positive natural birth stories. Hi, my name is Anna, and I am the Natural Birth Podcast host. I'm a former midwife who left the system, and I'm now the proud founder of Sacred Birth International, a woman-owned company with a mission to revolutionize the birth world and bring focus to the sacred and the natural intelligence of the birth process. We do this by providing world-class education, courses, programs, and coaching to equip women with the knowledge and the tools to have conscious pregnancies, empowering and positive birth experiences, and the most nourishing start possible for themselves and their babies postpartum. We also educate and mentor aspiring birth workers into sacred space holders and physiological birth advocates in the Sacred Birth Worker Mentorship, the Beyond a Doula training. If you'd like to work with me or take any of our courses, programs, or the mentorship, then head on over to sacredbirthinternational.com to find out more. Hi, Emma, and welcome to the Natural Birth Podcast. How are you?
Hi, Anna. I am super excited to be here.
So excited to have you. I am looking forward to your stories today. You have 3 to share with us, and
Correct.
you've made a interesting journey. You started out with a home birth. You ended up having your second in the hospital, and then you free-birthed your third.
Yep.
So I'm curious about that journey and how that kind of went, from home to hospital and then back home. And let's go back from the beginning, though. I'd love to hear, when you became pregnant, was home birth obvious for you that that's where you wanted to go, or?
Well, it really starts with hearing my mom's birth story with me. I was her first, and it was a very traumatic hospital birth, in which she was in so much pain afterwards that she couldn't even hold me. She kind of pushed me away. And I think I ended up spending several hours in the nursery before she kind of woke up, and she was like, "Oh, where's my baby?" And that always hurt a little bit to hear. And then as our relationship played out, into my adolescence, I always felt like that played a part. We just were disconnected a little bit. Another fun fact is that when I was in 6th grade and we started learning about reproductive health, I was so into it. And my friends were like, "What? Why are you so into this?" But I said I wanted to be like a reproductive health teacher. I've always had an interest in women's bodies. So that's kind of my backstory. My husband and I got married and we wanted to do some traveling. So we moved out to Kauai, one of the islands in Hawaii. And he got a job and I got a job, and we were just kind of having fun, but pretty quickly decided we wanted to try and get pregnant. So we did, and it took a few cycles, but not too many. And we did fall pregnant. And then after that, the pull to come home and to be near family with our first was overwhelming. So we pretty quickly decided we wanted to come back to Michigan. And We did. And when we came back, we started taking a natural childbirth education class, like in person. This was in 2018 before Zoom was a thing. So we did, and it was like, 6 weeks, and we started learning about natural childbirth. We heard that the doula that was teaching the class had home births, and my husband and I definitely have like an inclination towards more natural, holistic lifestyle. And so we were just like, why wouldn't we do this? And so we started looking for a home birth midwife. And pretty quickly, our families were nervous about it. We have a lot of medical professionals in our family. And so when we interviewed two different midwives, one was not a nurse midwife, she was a CPM. And the other one was a nurse midwife and had practiced for a long time in the hospital before she started doing home births. Emotionally, I very much connected with the CPM. She had like 8 kids, and she was living out in the country, and she was just soft. And but ultimately we picked the nurse midwife because we were trying to make our families more comfortable. And we didn't really connect with her. We thought, okay, she's a means to an end for us. We want a home birth. This will make everybody more comfortable. So we went with her, and the prenatal care towards the end of the pregnancy was fine, And then I got to about 42 weeks, and she was going to be leaving for a vacation pretty soon. So she wanted to do like a witch's brew. I think there were other things in it, but the big ingredient being castor oil.
Yeah, the midwich brew. It's something that's famous all over the world, and something
Right.
here in Sweden too, the midwich brew or
Right.
midwife.
Definitely has its purpose. For, if you're trying to avoid an induction, or it has a purpose for sure. So I took it at 42 and a half, and in the afternoon, and by 5, 6 in the evening, I was having contractions. And the midwife and an assistant came over after she heard me on the phone. I remember just like it being very kind of easygoing and relaxed. And then throughout the night, it just kind of petered out, which, like I've learned on your podcast, it can definitely happen with castor oil.
Yeah.
So by morning, I really wasn't contracting too much. So then we spent like the entire day. She lived like an hour and a half away, so she never left. And we kind of spent the entire day trying to get me back into labor. So we were doing homeopathy. We were doing what I now think was probably the Miles circuit, like spinning babies sort of things. And it gets a bit fuzzy, but I think I must have gotten back into labor. She decided to break my water. I'm not totally sure where I was on dilation here. This is, 5 or 6 in the afternoon or in the evening. So I had been in labor for 24 hours at this point. Once she broke my water, it got really intense. And it was, kind of, I just remember it being like too hard for me to handle. Like I couldn't sit on the toilet. I was very much in the fear tension cycle. And she checked me again. And again, this is fuzzy. Emotionally, it felt like she did something that she didn't tell me she was going to do. Like she didn't ask for consent. But during a contraction, it felt like she tried to like open my cervix, like help it.
Yes.
And it was incredibly painful and scary. And I screamed like, get out of me.
Yeah.
And she, she did. And she pulled my husband aside and told him, I think we should transfer. Emma could be in labor for another 24 hours. And, she's exhausted. And I just felt so done with her. I didn't want anything to do with her at that point. She also told my husband that I had like regressed in dilation, which I'm sure I did. I was very scared.
Yes.
So we transferred, and I remember feeling relief that we transferred. The hospital that we went to had a bunch of midwives. So I never had to work with like a male OB, which was a really hard line for me. I never wanted any male energy in my birth space. So I got similar to an epidural. It was like a one-time injection. They called it an intrathecal. And so that allowed me, I took a nap, and then apparently I was 10 centimeters and I could feel pressure. So I was encouraged to start pushing. So I pushed for 2 hours, just on my back, and it felt like an athletic journey as opposed to giving birth. Now it felt like, just being very coached. And the one thing that really stuck out to me right at the end when my son was born was right as he was coming out, like the look of like fear on the midwife's face. Just like as she was like about to, I don't know if she helped pull him out. Those details now that I know so much more about birth are kind of fuzzy. But yeah, he was put on my chest, and it was a pretty smooth, hospital stay. The one thing that really took over with my postpartum period was that he was diagnosed with a genetic metabolic disorder, with a newborn screen. So we had to go stay in a NICU to get further testing when he was about 5 days old. And then he had to be put on a special formula for the first 9 months of his life so that he wouldn't be ingesting too much protein. So that was just, that really took over all my mental and emotional space. So I didn't do a lot of processing with that birth at all, during that first year postpartum. I do remember really struggling with the transition from maiden to mother. With my sexuality, I wanted to feel beautiful in a way that like younger women do. I really struggled with that. I was jealous of friends who were traveling the world, I wanted to be a part of that as well. And it's just one of those things looking back that I feel like women could do in preparation.
Yes.
That I had never even thought about until I started again listening to your podcast. That would have made those emotional struggles easier in my postpartum period. And I would have felt, that energy could have gone to taking care of myself, taking care of baby, things like that. So.
But it's so normal in our unnatural society, right? That
Right.
we're just not informed, and not even, it's hard to even comprehend this, that it even is a rite of passage, and that it is going to be a big identity shift, especially the first time around. And so many women experience this, whether they are aware of it or not. I mean, it helps to be aware of it, because then you can be more compassionate and, take care of yourself in a different way. But it is, I mean, it's huge whether you know it or not, but even more so, of course, when you don't and you're not prepared for it.
Yeah, and I think I would have made different decisions mothering had I been a little bit more prepared for it. I wouldn't have wanted to like go out for a night with my girlfriends and like that early on, and like that was a struggle when I did it because I intuitively felt like I needed to be home as well. So
Yeah.
Yeah, I think even not having it in our comprehension, if you did have a doula or a birth worker that you're working with as a first-time mom, like talking
Mm,
about like just bringing up some of those things that are going to feel different. Uh,
yes. Yeah.
So, yeah.
Absolutely. It's something that I work deeply with clients, and of course also my mentorship mentees, to be able to
Sure.
hold this space and prepare for this amazing rite of passage on all the levels, baby
Right.
care, breastfeeding, but also healing the newborn mother, and this huge rite. It's so important to be aware of this. But also it sounds like and this goes to show like how important it is who you invite to your birth space. And I heard you say that you did feel more towards the first midwife, but the logic and the family and that kind of took over, which happens for so many women who then maybe choose hospital for their first because other people's opinions, their partner's opinion, and maybe their own, going like, oh, well, for the first, we'll just do it in hospital, and have to go through this kind of traumatic event before they choose something different and listen to their intuition and heart. And yeah.
I mean, and I think a lot of women will, recognize this very people pleasing.
Mm.
I mean, my husband and I talk about it all the time. Like that has been ingrained in me so hard. And you know, I still struggle with it. It's a journey, and I think I've healed a lot with it.
Yeah.
But it's like everything, it will always be a journey to kind of fight that, what do I want versus what am I doing to kind of keep the peace and not upset anyone.
Absolutely. It's so deeply ingrained in us, and it's so subconscious and unconscious as well. Like it just because it's done also unconsciously from our parents. If
Right,
if you have a brother, I have a brother, still, and I can really see it so clearly as an adult, but the difference in how they speak to us, what they expect from us, all of it.
right,
And
right.
mm, yeah, as women, it's just so deeply, deeply conditioned for us. And we need to rewire so much around that to become sovereign mothers, to become sovereign birthing women, to become sovereign women in like adult women, right?
Well, and that's what's so beautiful about birth is if you will allow it, it can really help to rewire some of that. So there's
Yeah.
a built-in system there for us.
Yeah.
We
It
let
really
it.
shows you your power. Yeah, it really shows you your power as a woman. If you don't call in people around you or go to places that will do everything to take that power away from you.
Right,
Even then, you can do it. You can still feel it, but it's much more of a fight. You really need to become the lioness.
right.
So, so after this experience with your second, you choose a hospital birth, though. What led you to do that?
Um, I think just I kind of put that midwife in a category of like all home birth.
Yeah.
It's just being like, you know what, that was too much for me. It worked out better at the hospital. We got to know that doula who taught the natural birth class, and so we were like, let's hire her. She'll help us through this. And I was in nursing school too. So at this time, so that was just a big part of my brain, is being in school. Um, and yeah, so we hired her and I continued in school. I noticed during this pregnancy, because my first one, I really didn't work too much. And I really didn't have like a achy or I just didn't have a lot of the pregnancy ailments, physical ailments during my first pregnancy. But during my second, while I was in school full time, I certainly noticed, my hips and indigestion. And um, I just think that's worth noting because as I go into my third, again, it becomes different in different circumstances. So I had a lot of chiropractic care, which was beautiful for me during that pregnancy. It really helped. It was like a woman, and so there was that connect, and she really believed in what I was trying to do, and I wanted to try for an unmedicated birth because I love experiences in life. I love getting all different experiences. And so for me, it was kind of just like a check mark. It wasn't so much like a spiritual thing I was trying to embark on. So without the midwife, the home birth midwife, I just got my checkups in the hospital system. And luckily it was all women in a midwifery group. So again, that was always my hard line, was that I didn't want any OBs, and I didn't want any males in my, birth journey. I again felt like towards the end, physically I just felt done. So I wanted to take castor oil. And so I did my own research this time and kind of figured out, dosing. And so when I was 40 weeks and 5 days, I took a small dose of castor oil and pretty quickly felt contractions that felt different than Braxton Hicks. So I took that at about 10 o'clock in the morning. My husband came in. I was hanging out with my toddler. He was 2.5 at this time. And so he came back in, and pretty quickly I felt like I needed space from being a mom. I just needed to focus inward, and I was kind of irritable with him, and I had told him what I was doing, but I don't think either of us expected it to just like kind of go, which is like the other side of castor oil, I think, when it does work. And so contractions started ramping up. I called my doula. She's like, well, okay, just let's see where this goes. I called her back like 10 minutes later, and I was like, nope, I think we need to go to the hospital. It was a 30-minute drive. So just wanted to make sure, we made it okay. And so we put my toddler down for a nap, and we got in the car and we started going. And, during, in the break of the contractions, I was very emotional. I just felt like a lot of, I was crying a lot, but not sadness, just like a release, just everything felt very heightened. And we get to the hospital, and I was still able to walk, in the breaks of it. But we went to triage and met my doula there. And luckily everyone knew who my doula was at this hospital system. So there was always that like buffer, even though there were always more people in the room that I now would not be okay with it. I still felt somewhat of a bubble, just like protection from, outside influences to some extent. So I was checked, and things were really starting to, they were just starting to go, they were continuing to go quickly, I should say. It was probably noon at this time, and I was 4 to 5 centimeters. I had on, they were doing intermittent monitoring. And then we got moved back to a room. I got in the bathtub, which was nice. And I was starting to feel nauseous in between my contractions. At some point, though, the bath just didn't feel like I needed to move again. So I got onto the bed, and I was on a beanbag on all fours, if that makes sense. And I was checked. I was a 7. And again, this is getting really blurry. But at 2, I was checked in a 7. And it was really intense for me. The pain felt at that time unbearable. I just, and I couldn't verbalize well, as many like laboring women come to understand. So I felt like I couldn't breathe super well. I was holding on to this bean bag, and it wasn't like a cloth bean bag. It was some type of, plastic, fake leather material or something. And so I know I wasn't breathing effectively. Um, there were a lot of nurses, and then we had a midwife come in, and then my doula was there, and my mom was there. And I just felt very much on display, which was really uncomfortable too, just like kind of at what I felt like at the time at my worst, just like butt in the air, my water breaks and it goes everywhere. And I remember being like embarrassed about that, if that makes sense. Um, but pretty quickly from there, I started to feel the urge to push. And I don't know if I was checked again or not, but I was told to kind of go with it. And so I was pushing, and I really was hoping that that was going to be a relief for me, but it was still incredibly intense. And right at about 3 p.m., I was told to like flip over. Again, the details are a little bit blurry, but I flipped over, and my second son was, about to be born. And again, like the look on the midwife's face, it just felt like like fear. There just felt like an air of fear, even though looking back as a doula and an educated birthing woman, like everything was just happening like normal. Um, and he was born and put right on my chest. When I look back at my birth story notes that I wrote, pretty soon after, I guess he had a nuchal cord and meconium. So like all the things that were like, oh my gosh, like we're good though. Yeah, so he was born, and everything was fine. Nothing was, I remember just being like, wow, that was the most intense experience of my life. Excuse me. I never want to do that again, was a thought I had.
So what was that, like 5 hours or something from
Yep.
taking your castor oil? Yeah.
Yeah. And so listening to other castor oil births and reading birth stories like that, I didn't have diarrhea or anything like that. When I took that dose, I tried to take it so that I wouldn't.
Yeah.
So that's good. But yeah, that intensity, um, or the quickness of it,
Yeah.
definitely seemed like a symptom of the castor oil to me.
Yeah, so just for anyone listening, first of all, I really don't recommend ever taking castor oil on its own. And um yeah, if a big if, and it's up to every woman, just like choosing where to birth or having an induction, whatever, is up to every woman. It is an induction, obviously, a form of induction. And it kind of, castor oil makes you get diarrhea, makes you, expulsion of your kind of what's in your gut. And it irritates, your gut, which in turn irritates the womb. And if the womb is ready, which it sounds like for your second birth it was, for your first it wasn't.
Right.
And that's where, so if, for example, your cervix is like butter and it's already dilated a bit, which for a second time mom, it's more common than a first time mom that, that your cervix is favorable like that before even going into labor yourself. But
Mhm.
if it is that, then it can happen like this. I mean, obviously it can also happen that it doesn't just become explosive, but yeah, more often than not, castor oil can really have that effect, that it just goes, and I've had clients who've chosen that maybe with their previous birth before working with me and having that kind of really explosive reaction of having a baby in a few hours only. And one, I think, was a couple of hours from taking it, like so fast. So
Yeah.
it can definitely happen. And she actually was a first time mom, I think.
Oh,
She
wow.
had, I think, yeah, just a couple of hours, 3 hours, something like that from taking it
Wow.
fast.
Yeah. And realizing again, after educating myself, that it was a form of induction,
Mm.
I think is big. I also think I also think, women should think about before getting a hospital induction, like, or maybe medical people should think about that as a form of induction as well. Because it does have less risks than some of our other medications.
Sure. But at the end of the day, if we look at all the people that get induced today, very extremely few of that massive percentage is actually truly medically indicated.
Right, of
Right?
course.
So like I think generally most people should very much question why they're being offered induction, and most of them I think should say no, because it's actually very much not indicated medically for their baby or them. It's
Right.
just you're going over whatever 40, 41, 42, whatever, is in that state or place, right? In country or that place. Or like your baby's too big or your baby's measuring small and all these, which are not, that's not a problem.
Right.
It's not there's so many things I could talk about with this. Anyways, I'm not going to go into that.
Right.
But yeah, this is an induction. I mean, stretch and sweep, like the membrane sweep is definitely an induction.
Yeah, and I certainly had a few of those during my second pregnancy. Again, I would never do it again, because I feel like another thing that I've really come to learn is that our cervix is so sensitive.
Yeah.
It is, and we just kind of hand it out like pap smear, like go for it, stretch and sweep, checks during labor. I mean, is part of the reason women's labors are painful at times because we have so much pain already associated with that area. Um, yeah, I really start to question that, even for myself during that second birth. I know the pain came from a couple of different areas. One being feeling like I was observed with a bunch of people I didn't know, and but that also being part of it too, is just allowing, wanting things to be sped up, wanting or being a people pleaser, like, oh yeah, I need this done for sure. So yeah, just a thought.
Yeah. And one thing that I think I've said several times here, but for anyone who's new, like there is a connection between our heart and our cervix. There's a direct connection energetically, but also the vagus nerve.
Right.
Right. So like our heart and our womb, our heart and our cervix. So when you touch the tip of the cervix, it's like you're touching your heart. Like it's so sensitive, it's so vulnerable, it's so intimate, not just because it's your vagina, but like intimate into your heart. And then you have a stranger stretching that, hurting that, measuring that. Like what? It is like it's mind-blowing to me how it can be so how people can be so disconnected from both their bodies, but also medical professionals so disconnected from that truth and just do that on routine and thinking that that's okay. Oh, yeah. Anyways.
Couldn't agree more. Yeah.
So you birthed your baby unmedicated in like 5 hours or less, really, on castor oil ride. What happened with your placentas both times? Did you birth them? How did you birth them?
Again, like such a disconnect, something I truly didn't even think about. I read a few books during my first pregnancy, like Ina May's and Gentle Mother or Gentle Birth, Gentle Parenting by Sarah Buckley, but none of them. Birthing from Within was another one I read. It's so funny reading them though, like coming back to my third pregnancy, like just such a big disconnect, like culturally being raised, how I was raised, what I was exposed to, what we believe about medicine. My mom was a pharmaceutical sales rep for 30 years, like just these things that like I thought I knew as true.
Yeah.
So none of that stuff really, sank in. So my placenta, like I have no idea. I assume they gave me the Pitocin injection. I remember looking at them, and being like, wow, that is crazy, like super cool. And then that being just the end of it.
Yeah. Like for most, such a
Yeah.
normal story. Like just
Mhm.
and even for women like yourself who like wanted a natural birth, like it is very common, and probably most people listening to this maybe haven't thought about the placenta yet. And maybe this conversation makes them go, oh yeah, okay. That's
Yeah.
also part of the birth. And for so many like, well, all traditional cultures also, in the US, in Europe, everywhere, has honored the placenta, the sac, the cord. It's all had like this mystical, spiritual beliefs around it, and rituals around it, and ceremonies, and keeping it and burying it, or
Right.
yeah. Whereas now it's just thrown away as medical waste. And
I
my hope, with this podcast and this episode, if people are new to listening to this, is that they start being curious about maybe seeing it as more than just something to toss away.
Yeah, I mean, even if you don't get into the spiritualness of it, like physiologically, what it does for our child, I mean, it's just huge. And then you move into like spiritually how impactful it is for both mother and baby. Yeah. So it again, it you know, because we are not raised with these rituals, like it takes education, like I've heard you say so many times. Um, so yeah, those were discarded. Didn't think twice about them after that. Um, I finished up nursing school, or I had a really nice postpartum period. My husband got 12 weeks off. He had a new job since our first. So we had a lot of time together as a family. So my postpartum period was definitely easier. Even with having two. I also had a huge break from school, so I didn't have to get right back into things. But I eventually did get towards the end of my school, and this is where I feel like my rebirth really starts. My last semester, I got to choose a really like in-depth clinical, and because of COVID, I didn't get to do OB, and I always knew that was like my biggest interest as a nurse. So I got to do a whole semester following one OB nurse before I graduated. And as I was driving to the hospital, my first day, I was like, all right, I want to get into the birthy state of mind. I'm going to just put on a birth story podcast. So I was like probably driving and pulling something up, which we shouldn't be doing, but I was. And so I just picked one, and your podcast popped up. And it was a story about a woman, I think, birthing in New York City. And as she was like transitioning or giving birth, like she saw stars, even though she was in a hospital. Like it was just this beautiful experience. And I'm pulling up to this hospital just like crying, like, wow, that's a birth story right there. And so I went in for my first day with like that kind of rattling around in my head, and, kind of walked into a circumcision, which was uh, incredibly rattling to say the least. Moved on to a birth, and I, I just, I locked eyes with another nurse as this baby was being born, and it was just the most beautiful thing I had ever seen, and I just like such happy tears. And I knew in that moment, even after the really traumatic circumcision that I saw, I knew I wanted to like somehow be in this space. I was quite sure of it. So I continued with that clinical through a few months, while also binging your birth stories. We have a sauna, so every night, and my husband had moved out to renovate our new home. So I had a lot of free time to myself. So every night I would get in the sauna and listen to a birth story, and I would listen to them while I was driving, and with no intentions of having another baby or anything that, I was hooked. Um, And I was also so disgusted with what I was seeing in the hospital. I was disgusted by the nurses. I think every health professional comes into it wanting to help. Like, I'm not saying that any of these people are malicious or anything that way. It just becomes a culture in any setting. And it can be toxic, especially in a labor and delivery unit. And how they would talk to the women, how they would talk about the women behind their backs, how they would talk about home birth. There's just so much judgment, you know? And I also noticed things listening to your podcast versus what I was seeing in real time physiologically. Every woman that I saw gave birth at that hospital had a hemorrhage.
Yeah.
And why? It was never discussed why you would have a hemorrhage. It's just like the risk of having a hemorrhage. Well, is the risk of having a hemorrhage higher in a hospital? Because from my anecdotal experience, it seems like it.
Oh, yes. Oh,
When
yeah.
you don't feel safe,
So
when
much
you
more.
get your baby taken out of you, when you're told how to push and how, like, what position to push in, and when you're induced and have different medications pumping through. So that was remarkable to me, because I think I had heard only a handful of times in your podcast and your birth stories that you shared, you know, of moms hemorrhaging. And so by the end of that experience, I was like, well, I don't think I can be a labor and delivery nurse anymore. This is just not, I don't want to have to be fighting that battle every day.
Yeah.
Every time I'm at work. I don't want to be friends with these people and know that I'm a people pleaser and have to fight, like, be on that like dance that dance, you know. Like, do I really want to help women? Because I don't think this is where I can do it the best. So, and also listening to all those birth stories totally got me in the mood to want to have another baby again too. So that also started to really sink in. So I graduated. I did not get a job. I was offered a job at an OB, but I ultimately decided not to take it. And just to kind of figure out how I could be in the birth space. So I thought about becoming a midwife. You know, I could go on to be a nurse midwife, but we didn't have any. I live in what I call a birth desert. I'm in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. So just a couple of hospitals, one home birth midwife. Yeah, it's a birth desert. So I thought about becoming a midwife, but I wouldn't have anyone to train me, so we'd have to move, and then wanting to have another kid, I really didn't think that would be the best timing of that. So I decided I wanted to get into being a doula. And that kind of happened right when I got pregnant with my third. And it was really cool with this pregnancy. Spoiler, it's a girl. I felt so much creative energy. I don't know if it's just because I was more in tune with everything that was going on, or if it was because it's a girl. You know, you just never know. But yeah, I used all that knowledge I had acquired by listening to your podcast and reading books and kind of digesting them totally different. And then it became time to really decide, how do I want to do this? So I always knew that free birthing was an option, but I knew my husband was nervous about it. And it was because of what he had seen, you know? And I think a lot of males see their wives, especially if they have a traumatic hospital birth in any sense of the word, and they're just the saviorism, you know, and I mean, even I felt like saved by the midwives during my first birth. And, you know, so I it's very easy to play into that. I met up with a home birth midwife, but ultimately didn't connect with her. And I just wasn't going to make that mistake again. It's not like I started my free birth journey just like hardcore wanting a free birth or an unassisted birth. I wanted to feel most intuitively like connected to my choices. And that's really hard. I hope my story doesn't make it sound easy, because we're just constantly fighting that. Could something be wrong? What, am I making a bad choice? It's those words play in our heads a lot. So my journey to choosing a free birth was really about, okay, I'm just gonna listen this entire pregnancy. And if I feel anything off, I'm going to listen to that too. We live only 7 minutes away from a hospital, and it has a NICU. And so that was always a source of comfort as well. That I like, if I felt the need, I would totally go and utilize those services during my pregnancy or during my birth or after. We did do a 20-week ultrasound, because A, that was always a way my husband felt connected. And B, I just thought, I know if they see anything, I know how to do my own research at this point to decipher whether or not I need to be scared or not. Yeah. Nothing came up. It was a perfectly healthy 20-week ultrasound. So we kind of moved past that. And that was the last, that was the last time I had medical professionals involved in that pregnancy. I will say, not having to move my schedule around, not having to drive to appointments, it was all so nice. I just got to live. I just got to like take care of my boys. I was working part-time as a nurse. I was getting my doula business kind of off, so I was utilizing a lot of creative energy, and that was really fun. And I just noticed I didn't have any aches and pains really. Of course, I'd have a night, that I was uncomfortable, and my husband's a physical therapist, so that has always been nice during my pregnancies. He can help me, and it was a very relaxing pregnancy, and it was during the summer. And I just remember people being like, oh man, you must just like hate this weather. But like, I loved it. I was comfortable. I don't like being heavily clothed while I'm pregnant. So like, I liked, just being in shorts and a t-shirt. And I did keep our birth plans, pretty close to to our inner circle, because for obvious reasons, birthing unassisted has a reputation, or some people have never even still realized that that's an option. I think the word on home births is out, it seems like, in the birth communities for sure, but I don't know that people think about that, which is fine. So I kept that pretty under the wraps. And it was a really beautiful, relaxing pregnancy, even with having two very high energy boys at home. And not a lot of stress though.
Yeah, beautiful. And did you have any early signs of labor approaching with this one?
Yeah, so one of my big things was I didn't want to interfere with the process at all. So that was really exciting for me, because I just wanted to see what would happen if nobody interfered with my birth, myself included. So at 39 weeks and 1 day, I went to bed, slept great. And I had a dream, and I've had dreams like this before, like when I'm about to start my period, where I have a dream where I bled. And it wasn't like a scary pregnancy bleed. It was like I lost my mucus plug sort of thing. And so I woke up and I was like, wow, that was super interesting. And sure enough, like within an hour, I lost my mucus plug. So that was really cool. And even though I knew it might not be today or tomorrow, like I knew that meant that I was definitely moving into that territory. It just felt really tingly in my uterus too. Like I just felt like kind of like an excitement. I got my boys off. They were in like a day camp, you know, outside program for part of the summer. So I got them off to that, and I got this insane energy to clean. It was like it was a high. I don't know how else to describe it. I was vacuuming, I was cleaning the floors, I was, you know, seeing things. It was, I mean, truly, it was almost like I was on a drug. I could see all the marks on the wall all of a sudden. And I was just like, you know, I had never experienced anything like that. And then I kind of finished a task after a few hours and just felt an overwhelming sense of like needing to slow down and like rest. So I did. I made a, you know, I got a big meal together for myself and I was eating, and then I kind of felt the first contraction. And it was pretty chill, but just definitely different than Braxton Hicks. And so throughout the afternoon, I just had a lot of irregular, easygoing contractions. Maybe not a lot, I should say. They'd happen like I'd have one, and then 5 minutes later have another, and then 45 minutes later have another. So it just wasn't anything I was like, oh my gosh, this is it. It was just kind of like, you know, just going with it. I was supposed to pick up my boys, and you just never know how birth is going to go. So I asked my husband to come home early from work and do that with me just in case. And I'm so glad I did, because the timing never really changed at that point, but the intensity did. And all of a sudden I was like, you know, really trying to focus on my breathing during them. So we picked up our boys, we met up with my in-laws and just kind of vaguely let them know, yeah, things kind of feel funky, you know? So just, yeah, maybe just have your phone on you. Like, I still very much wanted to protect that space, but also I wasn't, again, I wanted to go with my intuition on this. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do with my boys. I would have like wanted very much for them to be in that birth space if it made sense. And I also knew that it might not make sense. So just having our backup, you know, our childcare options ready was a good thing. So we had dinner, we put the boys to bed, all the while they're really irregular still, but they're intense. And so I was a little like just getting into my thinking brain, like, this is odd, you know, they're just kind of all over the place, but they are more intense than I would imagine. So I put the boys to bed and I was like, I am going to try to sleep. No matter what, I'm going to try to sleep. So I put myself to bed at 8:30 and I woke up at 10:15 and I immediately knew I was not going to bed after that. I was happy that I got some sleep, but the intensity was definitely picking up. So I got up and I wanted to let my husband, and I guess I should back up to just talk about my husband, because he was not on board with a free birth for a long time. As I kind of shared, he was a little bit traumatized from what he saw. And we had to have a lot of conversations about, I mean, we share everything. So I had been talking about birth incessantly for now, 18 months. But and it finally got to a point where he really didn't want to. And I had to look at him and be like, you know what? It's no longer your option. Like, it's no longer your choice in this. I get to make this choice. You can either support me or not. And that was the point where he knew that I was taking full responsibility for this. And that made him feel a lot more comfortable. And I know that sounds kind of backwards, but that was just our story with it. And that was probably 2 or 3 months before, you know, the end of the pregnancy.
Yeah.
And once I was at that point, so was he.
But I feel like that's just like, because I can feel that in my body, like as a midwife or as a doula, like, when you feel a woman do like take that responsibility, I mean, all women should take that responsibility. That should be like, that should just be how we are raised, how we understand the world. Like it is your birth, your baby. And to cultivate that relationship with your baby and your body and the birth process is so important. Wherever you birth, whether you choose to have an unassisted birth, home birth with a midwife, birth center, or hospital, it doesn't matter. Like
Right.
that should be the way you prepare for birth, right? And so I understand his feeling of relief, because I feel that when clients I work with, I screen my clients just that they screen me, that we, want to work together. And I don't just say yes to anyone. It's really that feeling of like, I want to work with women who want to claim their births. That looks different for everyone, but to have that, that's important to me also as a birth worker, that the woman actually is not going to put on me or on someone else her experience. It is something she's claiming for her own. Yeah.
Yeah, and it was a big moment in in my pregnancy, it was a big moment in our relationship. And yeah, yeah. I so once we kind of got past that point, it was kind of smooth sailing. And again, I was still listening every single day for, do I need any care? I ate a really whole food diet. I feel like nutrition is just not, especially as our placenta is forming, it is not given the credence that it deserves. How many cases of preeclampsia could be avoided if we ate a whole food diet during the creation of that placenta? How many times would high sugar readings be not if we, were eating whole food diets? And so
Yeah.
that was a really big part of all of my pregnancies. But because I had healthy pregnancies beforehand and I had that, diet piece, I just was never concerned about my blood pressure or my glucose readings. Those were things that I checked previous pregnancies that I didn't feel like I needed to do this time, because I felt healthy and I knew I was doing all the right things. And if I didn't feel well, I was gonna, at the very least, check those things first, So, yeah, I did want to get that tidbit, because I just feel like, when I hear OBs or even hospital midwives just like, oh yeah, just get whatever you can get in the first semester or first trimester, like white bread and crackers and stuff. It's like, man, I think we really should try to focus on high protein and whole foods, and that will carry over through your pregnancy in my view.
And in preparing for getting pregnant too, like getting your body out of inflammation and just nutrient dense food. And as women, we actually really need fat.
Right.
And, for the last at least couple of generations, like my mother and grandmother, still will choose light products, because it's so indoctrinated into them. And of course, still for so many that you don't want to eat too much fat. And actually, we really need that for our hormones, especially
Totally.
just our balance as women.
Yeah. And that was, I mean, yeah, I have no fear of fats. I totally agree. That's like every meal.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah. Beautiful. Okay, so let's go back to your early hours of labor there. You're in bed, you woke up 10 p.m.
yep, and so I kind of got my fairy lights going because I'm the fairy lights doula, and I got on my birth ball, and I, for a couple hours I just I walked around, and but it kind of got to a point where I wanted to get into the bath. We didn't get a birth tub. I just didn't want to. Just like another thing I didn't want to have to do, but we had a bathtub, so I wanted to get into the bath, and I felt like, okay, this is the point where it'll be nice to have a second pair of hands. And so I woke up my husband, and he helped me start the bath, and I got into the bath, and it was so nice. I have heard that so many times on your podcast, and I wondered this pregnancy, will I be a woman who melts in the bathtub or who is like disappointed because of her expectations? And I was not disappointed. It was awesome. Um, so I labored in there, and as soon as I woke my husband up, my contractions got more regular. So I don't know why they were so irregular during early labor and even after I had woke up at my short nap. But once my husband was up at about 1 a.m., they got a lot more regular. I wasn't timing them, but it felt like anywhere from, 5 or 6 minutes apart. So I was in the bath, and we were listening to music and just talking. And it was a very similar experience to when my daughter was conceived. We were taking baths together and listening to the same playlist and just talking very intimately. But because I didn't have a birth pool, it was pretty uncomfortable, just the hardness of like I wanted to be in there for hours. But after about an hour, like I just felt like I needed to move and do something. And so I got out and got on our bed, and I feel like I kind of started to get into transition at this point because I was starting to get really nauseous again. And I was also having a lot of like bowel movements. So it just felt like I was starting to kind of clear out, and the intensity was really strong. Um, I started vomiting, not like just uncontrollably, but just like a couple of times. So I was like, okay, this is probably around transition. And what I noticed about the pain is that it was still there, and it was still recognizable from my second birth. Like I recognized similarities, but what was so different was my mindset. I I couldn't, like, during a contraction, I couldn't, you know, verbalize a mantra, or I couldn't like say a prayer, but what I could say was yes. And so I did that a lot during each contraction. I just said yes, just trying to accept the the sensations, trying to, you know, keep myself open. I really noticed if I was starting to like tense a little bit. Um, and it wasn't every contraction that was pain-free, but I did have a few. And so it was a really cool cycle of just like every time I had a contraction, it was a new like moment to like either accept it or not, you know? And so I don't want to say it was like a battle by any means, but it was just like this dance of like, it wasn't like I got to a point that was just pain-free. It didn't really, like I never was at that point, but I had the opportunity to like face it again and again and again and try to accept it again and again and again. And it was just a really cool um, experience that I had never had before. So after I was done vomiting, I was like, okay, I'd like to get back in the bath now. So I did, and I couldn't really talk. And, you know, I was really trying to relax between contractions. I had a bunch of towels so that it wasn't so hard, but it was definitely still kind of tricky to like be able to relax against the hardness of the tub. So I was in a semi-reclined, like laying position. And at this point, I was really curious about, you know, I just got to a moment where I was curious about where I was. So I gave myself an examination and I felt my amniotic sac, and I felt um, what I assumed was my baby's head. And so I was like, oh, wow, cool. Like, never felt that before. So I stayed in the bath for as long as I could because it really helped me relax. But I also felt like it was helping me relax, but it maybe wasn't helping me progress because of the position that I was in. So I was there for probably another hour and then I decided to get out. And at this point, it was maybe 5 a.m., 5:30. And the boys hadn't woken up, which was amazing. Definitely some birthy magic going on there, because they wake up for much lighter noises that they hear, you know. Um, but things were really intense, and I intuitively knew like this was not the time to include them in the birth space. So my husband called his parents and they came and got them right at about 6. But to back up just a little bit, got out at 5:30 and really started to feel, once I was more vertical, started to feel that urge to push. And similar to my second birth, there wasn't like this, like the intensity didn't go away. You know, the intensity was continued through the whole pushing process. And because of how fast my second was, I thought maybe it would go fast again because I probably only pushed for 15 minutes with my second, but I was pushing for at least an hour. And I wouldn't check constantly, but I would check and I just wasn't noticing a lot of progress. And my boys get picked up, they are out of the space. That's a nice relief. But then I just had this feeling that I remembered I haven't felt her move in maybe 10, 15 minutes. Whereas I had felt her move the whole labor, in different ways. And I had been pushing for an hour. And so that kind of just just lit up my brain a little bit. And I looked at my husband and I was like, I need to get this baby out. And that was just the feeling I had. And so I had been pushing previously like on all fours because that was the easiest way to relax during like when I wasn't contracting. So I decided to kind of stand up on our floor and then use my husband as like something to hold on to. And so that's just what I did. I started to feel a contraction coming and I grabbed him and I squatted and she came right out and we were both like, oh my God. So we had like 4 hands trying, we caught her, but it was like so I have like it makes me laugh and it makes me so happy, are just like confusion on how to like catch this baby. And she was very vocal right away, which I think for any moms, that's just always you just know at least your baby can breathe, if they're yelling out, they can breathe. So yeah, we caught her and then we only had to unwrap her one time. And I'm not totally sure about how the cord was, but it was a non-issue. And we put her on my chest and she was pretty mad, or, just an abrupt ending to her journey. But we were both just like, wow, you're here, Ren. Like we were so excited. And I kind of sat back on the bed and I got the shakes pretty quickly. I think I was just, that adrenaline I had at that last moment was pretty intense.
Yeah.
And I think the shaking was just a way for the hormones to kind of get out of my system. But yeah, we relaxed and sat back in my recliner, and the sun was starting to come up, and it was just like, wow, I cannot believe we did this. It was so, she latched right away, which was awesome. I had a tincture in case the placenta didn't come on its own. And so at about, for the birth notes that I had for my husband, like I wrote down, between 40 minutes and an hour, if the placenta hasn't come, like remind me, and I can, that first hour plus just flies right by. I feel like you don't even realize it. So I took, is it Angelica? And it came out right away. After that, I just like stood in the bathtub. And so that was good. The one complication we had was that after my placenta came out, a piece of the amniotic sac seemed to have gotten stuck somewhere. And I had never, for all the birth podcast or all the birth stories I had listened to, I had never heard of that. Probably because midwives, just can clean that up pretty easily. And, but yeah, it was stuck and I could not get it out. And I, was kind of trying to figure it out, and someone called it trailing membranes. And so we just relaxed at home and ate and drank. And I, every now and then I would try to get it out, and I just like couldn't. And there was a part of me that was like, well, maybe this is a part of the placenta. And so I did like my own examination, and I had also torn during it. And I had torn where I had my first previous birth. So I wasn't overly concerned about it. But it did just come to this point where I was like, well, maybe we should go in and just have them remove this and make sure that it's not a retained placenta, and maybe they can stitch me up as well. And so and I had my birth, and like she was perfect and she was eating, and I wasn't really concerned about, I wasn't concerned at all about her. But I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't making a bad choice. So we did go to the hospital and in the ER, and they took us right up to the OB who was on call. And the OB was able to like remove it, no problem, and stitch me up. And what was really cool about that experience was that I was so nervous for judgment. Or for people to, maybe try to interfere with what we were doing. But I just had to like have faith that like we made it the best decisions. And if we're coming in with good energy, like people will receive that well. And sure enough, like everyone, while we definitely had some shocked faces, everyone was super kind. They did exactly what we asked them to do. It wasn't a retained placenta. It was just trailing membranes that had kind of gotten caught in my cervix while it was kind of closing up. Yeah. And I got stitched up. I knew that I could heal on my own, but it was kind of like, that was just something that I felt comfortable doing because I had healed well enough, very well with my first two births, getting stitched up there. I think I probably tore because of the intensity of that last moment. And so while there might have been a different way to do it, like that's what my intuition told me to do in that moment.
Yeah.
I have no regrets about that.
Yeah. She was
So yeah,
probably closer than you thought, because when you are on all fours, it's just a different position. Whereas when you stood up with that gravity in itself, you probably wouldn't have even had to try to, do a squat and kind of, bring extra force to it at all. She probably was just ready.
right.
But yeah, that's what a beautiful story. And, for anyone listening, the reason why, obviously, you also knew that as you had been working in labor and delivery and you're a doula, that, having membranes inside the womb or there in the cervix, in the vagina, can make you bleed, right? And
Right.
can encourage potentially infection. And so that's why we want all quote unquote products, like it's called, retaining products, to come out. And I mean, that's sometimes when you wait, one thing with not waiting too long to birth the placenta is that the cervix might start closing, and it can be harder to get the placenta out, or as in your case, potentially some membranes. So that's just, also good to know.
Yeah. And I also felt like it was such a cool example in my life of feeling like I wanted medical services. I went and got exactly what I wanted, and through insurance and paying those people to do what I wanted. And there was no repercussions of, I was very like, thank you so much. Like, I really appreciate what you're doing for me. Like, I, it, I was really appreciative, and so I felt very respected as well. They weren't, I mean, who knows what they said behind closed doors, but the face that they gave me and the service that they gave me, we were out of there within an hour,
Beautiful.
back to our bubble. And um, yeah, it was just part of that. But I wouldn't have felt, authentic sharing my story without sharing that part as well.
Yeah, and it sounds like, the energy you walked in with was not a victim. It was like a sovereign woman wanting a service. And I think it's important to check ourselves, like, and, I'm talking about myself included, because the thing is, when we walk into a doctor's office, a hospital, fill in the blank, there is that hierarchy, there is that white coat syndrome, there is that, and that happens for me too. And I'm a midwife and I've worked in
Like,
that system, right? We're not immune. It is that power difference. And so to check ourselves about what do I need to do to like tune my energy in a sense of like, nice, obviously being a nice person. I think we should always be, and not assume that we're going to be treated badly, but assume we're going to be treated good, and assume
right,
that, and then act from that assumption of I'm going to be treated the way I want to be treated. So it's interesting how with the energy we come with, people are very different in how they will treat you. And
right,
so not coming in with a fight, coming in with like assuming that, of course, I'm going to get the service I need and I don't have to explain myself to anyone. And of course, you don't
right.
have to do that, and if you don't feel comfortable, for example, with you, like sharing that you chose to birth at home on your own, you can just say, that, oh, it happened so quickly. Like you can choose also what you invite them to know, right? Just like you choose to get to know that you're having a home birth, whether it's assisted or not, like you protect your energy, you protect yourselves. Yeah.
Yeah. And they asked if we wanted to stay the night, and we were like, no, I think we're okay. And so, I mean, it was just like it was a very good transaction, and we left. And you know, yeah, it was, my sons got to meet their sister, and that was, of course, super special. Um, my mom came up as soon as she heard. She lives 7 hours away, so she started driving. And we had done a lot of healing, between my other kiddos, just coming and being honest about our journey together. But it was really her coming up, and she stayed for a week, and really took care of our family. And that time is so, like, the baby blues just like do not adequately explain that, those first like week or two, where you're just like, if like you're taken care of and you're doing well, like you can still be like, kind of crying at the drop of a hat, but like just happy tears. Like, I was just so happy that my mom was there, and I was so happy that we had the, like, a I don't even want to say birth we wanted. I didn't know what it was going to be, but it was beautiful. And it was this like wonderful experience for our family. And my mom, even though she still says she would like go to a hospital if she were to give birth again, but she was so proud of me, proud of what we had done. And I have even heard from my sisters that she tells my birth story during like dinner parties, like awkwardly, but she's just so proud. So, like she's come a long way too. And it was a very healing, first few weeks.
Hmm.
Um,
I
yeah,
love that. And that's how we change the birth world, is one positive birth story at a time. And
right.
how great that she's sharing that awkwardly at dinner parties, because all those people will go away and then they'll share it. Oh my God, did you know what I heard at the dinner party last night? Right?
Right.
And then people inadvertently hear positive birth stories. That's
Well, and now that our baby is here and she's healthy and, we've moved on from our birth, I by no means am I going out and like telling everybody I had an unassisted birth. Like that's just not my style. But if it comes up, if it's pertinent to the conversation, if it's organic, it is nice to share.
yeah,
You don't have to feel so protective of it.
yeah. So if you had a first-time mama in front of you right now who's about to have her first baby and she really wants to have a natural and empowering birth experience, what advice and pearls of wisdoms would you give to her?
The first thing, so I kind of got two things down. The first thing, which we talked about a little bit, would be like visualizing that transition from maiden to mother. And it sounds like you do that with your clients, and I certainly do as well. Um, and I think just like a woman sitting down and journaling, what are the things that could be really hard for me, and how can I cope with that? And how can I understand my own feelings when I am feeling jealous, or, when it seems like ugly feelings are coming up, how can I both be what you said, compassionate and understanding of where these are coming from. So that was my first, because I just feel like, yeah, it just isn't talked about enough. But maybe more importantly, my second one is um, doing things to cultivate a sense of your own intuition. I I don't even know if I've ever thought about that before the last 2 years, 2.5 years of my life. When I kind of started to fall in love with birth work. So um, that was my goal during this whole pregnancy, was to take every, uncomfortable feeling I had and really try to think about, is this fear? Is this anxiety, or is this my part of my intuition? Are they mixed together? What am I trying to like, what is my body trying to tell me here? Um, and that goes for every birth situation, whether you're positive you want to have a second C-section, or you're positive you want to be in a hospital with the OB you've had for 20 years, or you do want to have a home birth and there's only one home birth midwife up here, but you want to still have her, or you want to have there's so many different ways to do it, even in a birth desert. Um, and so, yeah, I just think really trying to understand our intuition as women, and understanding that it gets taken away from us constantly, right? You open up your phone to Instagram and you see that, your kid plays with too many plastic toys, and could they have, like, we live in a culture that is just constantly trying to scare us for good and for not good reasons.
Yeah,
Um, and so, yeah, that would be my biggest piece of advice.
I love that. It's beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, what is your next step? Will you become a home birth midwife when your children are bigger, or?
I if you would have asked me a few months ago, I would have said, nope, no way. I don't want that responsibility. I think now I have my husband in my ear again being like, maybe you need to. And I'm like, yeah. So I am much like my pregnancy and birth. I'm just gonna leave it up to which way the wind goes while listening to my intuition. Now is not the time, but never say never.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast and sharing your birthing wisdom.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an honor.
Thank you for listening. If you love this podcast, then please consider sharing it, leave a review, or make a contribution on our Patreon page. And if you want to connect on social media, then find the podcast on Instagram as the Natural Birth Podcast. Thank you for listening.